chord charts that match the multitrack are now available on loopcommunity.com. Even better, they will automatically match and follow your custom arrangements inside of Prime if you use the Music Stand app by Worship Tools. Every band member can use the Music Stand app, and their chord charts will stay in sync with the tracks. Buy chord charts individually for $1.99 or get unlimited access for only $12 a month. Head to loopcommunity.com to try it today.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the WorshipFuel Show. My name is Matt McCoy. I'm the host of WorshipFuel. I'm also the founder of loopcommunity.com. Today, we have a very special guest. We've got TEMITOPE. So excited to talk with him about his new song. He's a songwriter, worship leader, and we're just going to dive into this conversation. Really looking forward to it. If you have questions, type them into the chats wherever you're watching this from. Make sure you hit the subscribe button also while you're down there so that you can stay tuned for future Worship Fuel episodes. Anyways, I'm looking forward to this conversation, so let's get started. TEMITOPE, what's up, man?
Dude, I'm still like blown away by this intro. I'm like, what is this? This is the most legit like podcast show thing I've ever been on.
Welcome.
God, I was like, what in the world? This is amazing.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have you, man. I'm so glad that you're on here. I remember when I first met you, it was like, I think it was 2019, the Dove Awards. And the Dove Awards show had ended, and we were all kind of walking around the floor. And David Goody was like, "Hey, you got to meet this guy." And he introduced us. And then that's it. We've been soaring ever since. So good to see you.
So good to see you. And Goody, literally, actually, I think it's tomorrow. It's 20 years for him at Capitol CMC, which is really good. So I got to just sign a card for him today. So shout out to Goody, because definitely my journey, I would say professionally, really like he was and is such a key element of my story. And I love that he was the connection between you and I. We also have the Escondido connection, if you remember.
The who? Escondido. Oh my goodness. Yes, I remember. My mom knew someone that you worked with or something.
Yes.
But when they were kids.
Yeah, it was like your mom knew a guy that I worked with in Boise, Idaho.
Yeah.
And he and I were talking about Escondido. For those of you who are not familiar, it's like a suburb of San Diego. So like most people don't know Escondido.
Yeah.
So for he and I to know Escondido was crazy enough. And then he and I were chatting, and he was telling me, "Oh, I know this one kid. His mom and I, like, I think he had a crush on your mom or something." He was like,
"Yeah, they were like childhood sweethearts or something."
Like something crazy. And he was like, "Yeah, she has a kid named Matt McCoy. Like, you should know him." And this was before, moving to Nashville, before meeting Goody, before meeting you. Yeah. And then when we met, it was like, oh.
That is so wild, man. I forgot about that connection. You're right.
Dude, wow.
Well, so you're in Nashville. You're a worship leader, songwriter. Tell us for people who don't know you, like how and when did you get started writing songs and releasing music? How'd that even get started?
That's great. Honestly, got started in Escondido. So there it is again. Grew up, born and raised in Escondido. My parents are immigrants. So my dad is from Lagos, Nigeria, hence the name TEMITOPE. which you did a great job of pronouncing. Well done, Matt.
Thanks.
Well done.
I practiced a lot beforehand, but yes, thank you.
I've been saying your name, Matt, for a long time. So
And you're actually saying it wrong. It's Mott.
Mott.
Yeah, no. Matt with 2 T's. Matt.
Yeah. Well, my dad grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, and my mom grew up in Nottingham, England, which is super.
Wow.
So I am like the child of like say I'm the love child between Europe and Africa, if you can believe it. With
Yeah.
all the colonialization, it's possible. People, one of my favorite people get thrown off because they're like, "Wait, so your mom's white?" And I'm like, "No, she's actually black." I'm like, "Did you know that Asian people live in Mexico and Mexican people live in Australia and Australians we have planes, trains, and automobiles everywhere?" So my parents both immigrated to the United States from their home countries when they were in their teens to go to college, and they met in grad school and married. They both immigrated to Southern California, got married, had 3 kids, moved to San Diego, raised us all in Escondido, and I love to say that like the home I grew up in, it was like a cultural cocktail, but not like a fun cocktail. Like I don't know where people are at with drinking, but like there's fun cocktails like a Long Island. Well, mine was like a Molotov cocktail. It was like fire everywhere, because you have these 2 cultures that are beautiful and have very distinct attributes and pros and cons about them rubbing together. So you got a dad who's Nigerian raising kids in the U.S. with his wife and our mom who's British. So you can only imagine how these were in there. So going to your question, I grew up, and when I turned 16, there was 2 things I knew I wanted to do. One was I wanted to marry this girl, my high school sweetheart, which again, culture is coming into play. My dad, Nigerian men, typically the story is get your life together and then get married. So you're not even thinking about marriage until like your 30s. It's very common for it to be later in life. Whereas my mom's, from the UK, so she's a little familiar. She's more familiar with like young love and things. But my parents did the opposite. Like my mom was not chill. My dad was very chill about it. That was one.
Yeah.
And the second thing I told him was I wanted to be a musician. So again, in Nigerian context, it's like, your parents, you immigrated here, your parents sent you here, chase your dreams. You would think it'd be like, oh yeah. And my mom being from the north, from the Western world, seeing how hard it is to make it, being like, don't do it. But they switched. And my mom was like, go, follow your dreams. You're following the Lord. Go, he'll provide for you.
Right.
And my dad was like, we immigrated here from Nigeria. Like my parents worked really hard to send 5 kids here to make a better life. That's a pretty big feat to send 5 kids from Nigeria to the United States. And so he was like, you can be a poor artist in Nigeria. Like, go get a real job. And so I ended up going to school and getting undergrad in public relations and then a master's in public communications. And making this short story shorter, I ended up right after I graduated with my master's degree. I'd already been working at public affairs firms and corporate entities doing marketing. I ended up having both of those things come true that I said earlier. One, I married my high school sweetheart. So we dated for 6 years. And then dated through high school, graduate school, undergraduate, and graduate school. And the second thing was there was a job that came open at the church I grew up in, Escondido. And I applied, and it was a very large church. So they did a global search, but they ended up with just your boy, the one that they grew up with. And it was a very interesting transition because, there's that Bible verse that says no prophet's welcome in his own town,
Yeah.
And it was much that where people wanted to see me a certain way because they're like, well, I remember you being like, a high school kid playing in a metal band, only showing up for the music and then ditching and taking a bunch of kids with you and like whatever.
Yeah.
But, he who began a good work, is faithful.
Right.
So I became a worship pastor and I started writing songs there at my home church, and people started hearing them and wanting me to lead. And so that kind of started me on this journey of eventually moving from a worship pastor to worship artist.
Yeah. And then you moved to Nashville and really dove in.
Yeah. I mean, I went from the church I grew up at. I was there for a while, I was on staff in that position that I was in as a worship leader slash worship pastor for like 2 years.
Yeah.
And I went from there to a church on the coast, Encinitas. You're familiar?
Yep.
So
Mm-hmm.
there for 2 years.
Paradise.
Yeah, dude, it was great. It was awesome. Hard to live. I mean, hard to afford living there, but it was amazing. So I was there for 2 years, and then went from there. I did a little thing at a camp in Southern California called Hume Lake, and
Yep.
that was kind of my first time being out on my own, like writing and playing songs for just, there was 1,000 kids a week. So, 9 weeks, about 9,000 kids. It was wild, 500 churches. And so that really kind of got me started in like, churches that were like, hey, you want to come do this event, or do you want to come lead at this and this? So that led me from there to Idaho. And I was in Idaho for 2 years, and then Nashville.
Wow.
Yeah. And the whole time, different opportunities came. And the big piece that got me to Nashville was I did a writing camp in Atlanta.
Okay.
My first time co-writing, but I was around a bunch of writers that, you and I both know.
Yeah.
And that was my first time really going, oh, okay, like I think I can do this, and understanding purpose, because that was also my first time in a multicultural environment outside of my home.
Yeah.
And so seeing go ahead.
Well, so then you kind of saw like, okay, I can do, this is what I'm built for, and I can do this, and I'm going to take it seriously and go to Nashville, because that's where you would take it seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I would say
where you have to be.
You kind of have, well, I think my buddy
have to, but it makes it easier. That's for sure.
100%. My buddy Phil Wickham, like he never left San Diego.
Yeah.
I don't know how he did it. I know how he did it now, but like back then I was like, what? Like,
right.
Like
now he has the best of both worlds. He's in paradise.
Yes. And he comes in and, and he's worked really, really, really hard,
Yeah.
So you can do it. I think like in Phil's situation, like, the hustle is the same. He just did it from California, and so now it's just a little easier. People see you and they're like, oh, I just heard that song that you were on or you wrote on. We have a set next week. Can you come? But if you're traveling in, you don't get those opportunities.
Yeah. It's kind of sometimes out of sight, out of mind in a way. You kind of have those run-ins at the coffee shop. You're like, hey, we should write together. Or totally. It makes sense.
Yeah.
So do you currently serve as a worship leader?
No.
Okay. So what does a day-to-day look like for you? Are you just writing songs? That's what you're focused on?
Yeah. Writing songs I'm focused on the church. Like I said, when I went to Atlanta, that was a moment for me. I would say it was a gears coming together moment. My whole life, gears were spinning without creating any traction. I didn't really have a purpose. I mean, outside of like living for God, but I'm like, what does that tangibly mean in my day-to-day life? Mm-hmm. And I mentioned earlier, like I grew up in a very multicultural home, but what that created in me as a kid was like just this sense of like identity, like displacement, if you will. I'm like, I don't know who I am. And we never talked about, like, Escondido at the time was very white. We didn't talk about like why were we the one of very few Black people in the town I grew up in? Why were we very few Black people in the church I was in? No one was, hey, TEMITOPE, like the way that God shows up through your family is unique and valuable. Mm-hmm. We need you to be all God's created you to be. So I wasn't hearing anything like that. And in the same way, like there's diversity amongst white people too. It's not like one size fits all thing. Like nobody is the same. Either God is infinitely creative or he's not creative at all, right? But Psalm 139 says each one of us is fearfully and wonderfully made. Mm-hmm. So nobody's copy pasted. And so I think for me, it just took a minute for me to realize like, okay, it's hard to know what you're supposed to do when you don't know who you are, right? Yeah. So I didn't really understand. I remember having a really powerful conversation at the second church I worked at with my pastor. And he was like, there's two kinds of people. Like, you got like your Pauls and your Timothys, if you will. I don't remember if he used the terms, but I remember the conversation. And we were talking about basically, hey, when God calls a Paul, raises a Paul, they like leave and they travel and they go. But the Timothys, like they stay, and that's neither one better or worse, but like you got to know who you are. But I couldn't figure out who I was. I didn't know. I wasn't even comfortable with me. So when I
Yeah.
go to and have that experience where I'm seeing all these kinds of people that look like me and don't look like me, that talk like me and don't talk like me, it was a minority majority in Atlanta,
Mhm.
in the city, but it's also a minority majority at the camp. I was at the writing camp.
Yeah.
Someone got up and said, "Hey, look around the room. Heaven doesn't look like you or me. Heaven looks like us."
Yeah.
And that for me was the moment where all the gears that were spinning out of traction came together, and I would begin
Mhm.
and like, oh, like I can never know what God's called me to do if I'm always running from all that He's created me to be. And so I
Mhm.
embrace my cultural background as Nigerian and British. I began to embrace the fact that I'm a Black man in a predominantly white world, and I have something unique and beautiful to offer, like everybody else. And when we learn how to stand together with our differences versus against each other because of our differences, we see the
Yeah.
heart of God on display. And so once I began to formulate that language and understanding, started to understand, like, oh, I think that message was meant to be carried to local churches to build the greater C church. And so when I moved to Nashville, I had a residency with my dear buddy, Travis Ryan. But that was like my last staff position at a church. And ever since then, I've been writing and leading worship and like sharing the message of unity through worship
Yeah.
around.
Yeah. I want to talk about that a little bit. I'm going to
Yeah.
ask you, like, so what would you say is your purpose now?
I would say my purpose is to help people to see, like I said, that differences that coming together, standing together
Yeah.
versus each other
Yeah.
is how we see the heart of God on display. And I think that
Yeah.
worship is the key to that. Because you look at
Yeah.
Revelation 4 and Revelation 7. I was just talking about this earlier today with one of my dear friends. And we were talking about how, you know, it's funny how like you reach an age and you become friends with your friend's parents.
Yeah. Right.
So my dear friend, I call her Mama Diarmis, but I grew up with her kids. Like her daughter was in my wife and I's wedding. Like I
Yeah.
grew up like as her kid, hence why I call her Mama. But we're friends, and so we were chatting. She is white. Her husband is Cuban, and so her kids are mixed. I'm
Yeah.
black. She's white. Our kids are mixed. So I was asking her, like, "Hey, Mama Diarmis, did you ever talk to your kids about like them
Yeah.
being mixed and the beauty of that?" And she was saying, and she explained why they didn't because they didn't, and so then I was able to explain why I do.
Yeah.
And I was telling her about Revelation 4 and 7. I'm like, it talks about the diversity amongst heavenly beings first, you know, the cherubim, the seraphim, all these heavenly beings, none of them the same. And then it goes on to say that around the throne of God is every tribe, every nation, every tongue, all people. That right there denotes diversity. I'm like,
Yeah.
it's very important to note that as God, through the Holy Spirit, not only gave John the picture of heaven, but also impressed upon his mind the things to note for us to read in 2024.
Yeah.
Very interesting and important to note that he said every tribe, every nation, every tongue, all people. That's to denote diversity. If it didn't matter, he would just say a multitude or a group. But he said every tribe, every tongue, every tribe, nation, tongue, and all people around the throne singing one song. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty.
Mm.
And that is powerful to me because when you again read before the diversity, that's to state like, oh, they weren't all singing in a uniformity. Because
Yeah.
unity is not uniformity, right?
Yeah.
Unity
Yeah.
is truly coming together with our differences. And I
Yeah.
think cool that worship was the core of that. They were
Yeah.
singing. Probably sounded like chaos, honestly. But I mean, to God, that is the
Yeah.
sweet, sweet sound to his ear. That is the aroma that
Yeah.
he loves. And so that's my purpose. And I think that's why music is at the piece of it.
Yeah, I love that. So unifying the church through worship. How can worship leaders do that? If they want to do that at their church, do you have any tips for like how they can, do that well at their churches?
Yeah, yeah. I would say that s- especially in the United States, but I would argue around the world. Again, my mom is her heritage is Nigerian and I think Indian, like from India.
Mm,
And so the fact that her family ended up in England was just goes
yeah.
to show how multicultural our world has truly become.
Mhm.
So I would say to a worship leader, you have opportunities all around you to engage with people who don't look like you, don't speak the same language as you, and see God differently. Find them locally. And I would say start simple. Take them out to lunch one-on-one. Take them out to lunch one-on-one. Build relationships, right? And don't come into that conversation as a, let me show you how we do it at our church. Like, come and go, can I learn about what's happening at your church? Can I learn about what songs are resonating with your people, how your pastor speaks about the Lord? Like, I want to glean. Like, come as a student and build those relationships. And I'm like, that could be a ground floor, level one. And then if you've built like even two relationships, two different people from different churches that speak different language than you, or people from different denominations, well, then maybe bring them together and go, let's all three or all four, however many, let's all have a conversation and then start rubbing off on each other. Take a couple songs. Hey, I'm going to try that song that I heard that Anglican worship leaders doing. I'm going to try that, I'm going to try that song that they're doing in Spanish. I'm going to ask that guy, hey, can you help me translate it from Espanol to English? Those kind of things, and bringing it in. Like, we have such a unique opportunity. People remember a 5-minute song, a 3-minute song. Even they remember a 30-minute sermon. So we have technology in our work. And if we can bring in the diverse pieces simply through relationships and conversations, I think that does way more for people. Them singing a song that they're culturally like, oh, this feels a little different. Like praise, elevation.
Yeah.
That's African rhythm that they've brought into mainstream worship culture in the United States.
Yeah.
For some people, it feels different. But maybe for some people, it's like, well, I want to learn more about Africa.
Yeah.
I've got a neighbor down the street that's from Senegal. I want to go talk to them. Like, it just, you know what bringing in these little pieces, what seeds that's planting in people's hearts for the Lord to then grow a tree to truly live out his what he's asked us to do. Love the Lord with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Man, that's so good. It's funny because when you go to a church and you see that they'll put a bunch of people up on stage to create diversity. Yeah. Do you think that is enough to just have people on stage? Because then they're just singing like, the same songs. Or do you think it needs to go a step farther where you actually are singing maybe different songs from different cultures and different backgrounds?
Great question. I would argue, you need to sing different songs from people's cultures and backgrounds. And I think it can be very dangerous to put people up there just to present a picture of diversity. I think that I heard a friend of mine say it this way, and I hope I say it right. But she was basically talking about how diversifying the platform, or like without purpose, is just tokenizing people. That's very dangerous, because you could be putting people in a position to be a person of color in a majority like white space. You need a certain heart. It's a grace-filled space, because they're going to say things to you as they're learning that might rub you wrong. Also, we can say things to people as they're learning and as we're learning that might rub them wrong. So it's a grace-filled space. You need people with the right hearts up there. And I'm not saying that everyone that's up on these platforms, multicultural platforms right now, doesn't have the right heart. But I think I would say to be very careful to a church community to bring in somebody. There's certain parts of Tennessee, for example, like just straight speaking, like out of the spiritual realm, that like as a Black person, I would not feel comfortable going.
Yeah,
I would not feel safe. And so I think it's important to have relationship, to know the why, but to be very intentional about creating space to bring people in, but to bring all of it in. You don't want a comfortable person of color on your platform. You want the whole essence of who that person is, because I would argue you're missing on a unique expression of God if you're trying to have a comfortable version of a Black person or a Latinx person or a Asian. Let them bring their culture, which involves bringing their language, and let that bless you.
It's interesting because I think a lot of churches want to do it. They might have the heart and desire to do it, but the only, as far as they can get, is just finding a Black person who can sing and put them on the platform. And then that's it. That's about as far as they go. And I think how does a church get past that? Like, go farther than that. And I think what you just said is really good. Like, well, it's also like building relationship, getting to know the cultures, getting to know like, hey, what song do you want to sing? Maybe even ask them.
100%.
That'd probably bring all sorts of ideas.
Oh yeah. And I think we're also living in a great time. I mean, like, part of what I do when I come into spaces, I love to have these conversations with churches. So maybe the first step is, hey, who is God already using and marked in this time and age to speak into this, and bringing them in, I'm thinking immediately of my buddy Michael Bethany, similar heart as me, out in Texas, black guy. And I'm like, dude, bring him in, bring these people in, and let them be a part of the community, and don't just bring them in to lead worship. Like what I love to do is like bring me in on a Saturday or Sunday whenever your gatherings are. But then as a writer, I'm like, okay, well then let's stay till Monday and let's write a song together. Because once I've seen and tasted and been through your experience, I have better context for what we're working towards. But also, let's have conversations. Let's go out to breakfast with your lead pastor and ask questions. And the thing is once you're bringing in, the beauty of diversifying the platform is you do end up diversifying your body. Yeah. Because people start coming in because they feel comfortable. And then as people are coming in and feeling comfortable from within your community,
bring got more.
You know what I mean? You bring them in. Hey, how could we do what made you feel ostracized at first? What do we do that would make you feel more welcome? What are things, songs that we could do that would make you feel more welcome? Again, I think is the bedrock.
Yeah, just the conversation. So shifting gears slightly, the word purpose has come up a few times in this conversation. And I just want to spin on that for like a couple minutes with you of how does a worship leader, because I think there's worship leaders out there who are, maybe they've just been doing it for a long time, 10 years. They're at it. They're doing the 7-day grind every week. You got a new set list to build, band to put together. And they're sitting there at their desk thinking, gosh, I feel purposeless. Like, what is my purpose? Like, almost confused. Like, what is their purpose? What would you say? You went to this songwriting retreat and that gave you a purpose, but you didn't know that going into it. It was something it was something you said yes to. It was an opportunity that came up. You said yes to. You didn't say no to it. And you never know what's going to happen in those opportunities. Like, is there anything you'd say to a worship leader of like, how does someone find their purpose if they feel like they're lacking it?
Well, I think the churchy, if you will, answer is the Bible talks about whatever you do in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus. So our purpose is to glorify God, right? I think also about in Matthew, let your light shine before men so that they may praise your Father in heaven. So your light shine before men so that they may see your good works and praise your Father in heaven. So it's like the way that we live, the way that we interact and speak to our spouses and our kids if we're married with kids, or just our kids if we're a single parent, or our roommates if we just have roommates, or neighbors, coworkers, the way that we interact with everybody, all of that is meant to be laced with the aroma of Christ, right? Yeah. So it's like immediately that is purpose. And I think as you dive into that piece of it and you just start asking the Lord, like, hey, like how do you want me to show up in these conversations? How do you want me to show up to the workplace? How do you want me to show up at home? How do you want me to, fill in the blank? I think he starts getting opportunities, because that's what it was for me before I even went to that writing camp. I already how, like, I get this, I've been a part of church since I was an infant. Like, I know all the things, but how do you want me to practice them? Does it matter? Like, the way that I was made? And then the Lord just, in his kindness, led me to opportunities where the door was open.
Yeah, and it became clear.
So I think that if that's any encouragement, I know that's still pretty vague to some of the worship out there. They're like, man, but I do think it just starts with a simple, like, opening our hands, like we ask our congregations to do often. Your hands is a beautiful thing because you have to let go of something to receive it. So like letting go, whatever like presuppositions I think I'm supposed to do or be as this worship leader or pastor, to receive whatever you have. How do you want me to show up in this space? What do you want me to do with these talents and gifts? How do you want me to lead my people? What aspect of your heart do you want them to see? And I can guarantee you start asking those questions, he will tell you. And it won't be the same as it'll be something else, which is beautiful.
I love that, man. So you just released a song with Josh Baldwin called Empty Threats. Tell us about it.
Well, shout out to Josh. You just got a #1 with Made for
Amazing.
More.
Isn't that awesome?
I'm sure people have been using Loop Community tracks to do it on Sundays.
Oh, yeah. Made for More is climbing the charts. He's such a great guy, man. I've done a lot of these Worship Fuel interviews, and he is like in my top 10 of interviews.
Oh, he's one of my favorite people of all time. And it was so funny because that writing camp that they wrote that song at was my very first writing camp with Capitol. And I remember being in the song share.
Yeah.
And that song was played first. Jesse Early sang it. Blake Wiggins was on keys. Jonathan Smith and Josh had to leave. So they played it, and it was the first song, and I was just like, oh. I was like, the level of writing that they're expecting, I don't know if I'm ready for this. Like, amazing song. So, Josh and I, we became friends. I'm pretty sure through our other really good friend, David Leonard. And I've loved Josh's music for a long time. It's been very inspiring to me because I'm a baritone. So I'm like, most worship leaders are like soaring out in their like high tenor spaces. And I'm like, I live in the depths. Like I live in blue sea. And Josh is similar. So I was like, oh, his voice quality is similar to mine. And also I love rock music. And this, like, he has this record called The War's Over. That was one of my favorite. It still is to this day, one of my favorite records of all time. And so me getting to meet Josh through David was really cool. Because I was like, dude, I remember listening to this. The record came out, I think, in 2017. And I was bumping it like from the jump, dude.
Yeah.
Love it. So he and I became buddies. And I just asked him, it's funny, I asked him, I was like, hey man, like the way that he does life in ministry has been inspiring. As I've gotten closer to him and seeing like, oh, your wife and kids like know you and love you, and you say no a lot to say yes to your family, and your career is still like going. I'm like, dude, I need like that in my life, you know?
Yeah.
And so I was like, can you mentor me, bro? And he was like, Josh, he's like, I don't know what that means, but we can hang out. Like,
right.
Yeah, dude, like just intentional hangs. So we've been hanging out intentionally for a while, but also writing too. And I was like, dude, I'm working on this record. I'd love to have a song with you on it. And I'm like, I have this title, like Empty Threats, like just the idea that like the enemy is always, even in my story, it's like there was all these lies I believed about who I was and who I wasn't, right? Because I didn't fit in with the majority culture. And it took a long time, right? Over 20, like I think I was like, I don't remember, like over 25 years at least. I don't remember how old I was when I went to the camp, but like I just began unraveling the lie once I had that moment in Atlanta and going like, oh, all of these were just attempts from the enemy to stop me from walking in my purpose. Like, but they're all empty. They're all empty. So we wrote that song together with our buddies Nick Bays, and who produced the song with me, and then Ryan Shirley, who's a legend.
I know Nick because I live in Chicago, and Nick used to be in Chicago.
Wait, what?
Yep, Nick Bays from City Church, Chicago.
Shout out to Nick Bays.
What's up, Nick?
Nick is one of my favorite people of all time, and he produced all my music together.
Yeah, you guys took him, as in Tennessee, I mean.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would have known him. I would have taken him anyway. I wasn't involved in the matter. If you want to really blame someone, blame Josh Schiffman.
Yeah.
But Nick
took him down there.
Yeah, but Nick, as you know, is so talented. He was bound to come down here at some point.
Yeah, right. Well, man, I appreciate you even taking the time to have this conversation. Thank you for sharing your heart, for sharing your purpose. And I'm hoping that worship leaders listen to this song, Empty Threats. It's awesome, man.
Thank you. It is a joy to have spent time with you. So grateful to see your face, dude. It's been a long time.
It's been way too long.
Been a long time. So next time you're here, hit me up. I would love to.
Yeah. I will, man. All right. Appreciate you. We'll see you around.
Sounds good.
See you, brother.
See you.
All right. Great interview with TEMITOPE. So much good stuff in there. First of all, go make sure you listen to Empty Threats wherever you listen to music. You're going to love this song. We've got the tracks at Loop Community as well. Listen to his other music too. He has so many great tracks. And I just really appreciate his heart and his spirit. And he's also addressing an issue that a lot of churches are thinking about, or maybe not thinking about, but the ones who are thinking about it too are thinking about it and struggling with trying to figure out like how to do it well. And I just love that he's got a lot of great thoughts and experience in that. And so make sure you also just look him up online too, because I think also you'll be able to find more conversations about that topic. So anyways, check out the music, Empty Threats. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to Worship Fuel to make sure you stay tuned for future shows. And until then, hope you have a blessed week. We'll see you next time.